Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Preda Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Preda, and today we have famous neuroscientist Brandon Brogan. Thanks for coming on the podcast. And what is it you want to talk to us about today?
So today we're going to be talking about brain plasticity, which is the idea that your brain, even if it's trained to think a certain thing or do a certain thing, can change over time.
Okay, cool. So how exactly did you come across the idea of plasticity?
So where I came across this idea, it's pretty funny actually, is my college Psych 100 class. And I remember in the beginning of the year we learned about something called the growth mindset, which I'll get into a little bit later, but I always thought, I don't really know how this could be possible without scientific explanation and some kind of biological explanation, and plasticity is that explanation. And what plasticity says, what I said earlier, is that ideas and thoughts and actions can change. And the way that this happens is that when you have a thought or any kind of response to any kind of stimuli, your brain fires what's called an action potential. And that action potential is relevant to a certain neuron in a certain area of your brain. So for example, if you're triggered to remember something, right? For example, a song lyric, that area of your brain that's responsible for memory fires a synapse, that specific neuron that's responsible for that specific memory. And if you're remembering it wrong, you can train that neuron to fire differently. And if you train over and over and over again, you can actually change the way you remember the song.
Oh, cool. So can you give us a brief description of what plasticity is?
Yeah, so like I said before, plasticity is just the idea that you can change.
Okay, awesome. So for all of us who may still be lost, can you think of an example?
All right, so like I was saying before as I was getting into, my favorite example is the song example. And oftentimes when you listen to a song, you can listen to it over and over and over again, and you hear lyrics. And what your brain registers of hearing might not always be what the artist is actually portraying in the song. But since your brain is hearing that over and over and over again, you start to sing the song the way that you remember hearing it, until one day you might find out, oh my gosh, I've been singing nonsense the whole time, when you look up the lyric page on YouTube. So after a while, you might want to learn the real lyrics, and you can actually practice and practice, and after hearing the song, knowing the actual lyric, your brain and your synapses will fire quicker and smoother in that area responsible for that song, that specific area, and it'll actually change, and you'll start to remember the right lyrics, and it'll be a habit now of knowing the actual lyric. So that's a good example. Another example I can think of that's very prominent is just simple as life in general. Practice makes perfect, like with sports. So if you're having trouble hitting a baseball and you practice your swing 100 times a day, every day, eventually the neurons in your brain are going to fire off those action potentials faster and your reaction time will be quicker. And this is what we call muscle memory. But it's really just an example of brain plasticity.
Oh wow, look at that. So how fast would you say that this happens?
So it can vary for any type of situation, and it's very prominent that it happens in all areas of life. So a good example that I would like to look at is like therapy. So people are taught how to actually change their behaviors in therapy through positive and negative reinforcement methods oftentimes. And these methods train their brain to change their behavior, which is plasticity. And it just changes the way that your neurons fire.
Okay, cool. So, and tell us again how this would relate to life.
So like I said in general, a big thing in life, this can work in a positive and a negative way, but one way that's really important to think about is the idea of schemas and stigmas in society, and how oftentimes many people form biases about certain things and they can't help it because it's a learned behavior. And like plasticity states, this can be changed. So that gives me a lot of hope as a person to realize, like, you're not always stuck where you are. You're not stuck thinking something. So you may be biased towards a certain group or something like that, but because of plasticity, if you practice and work at it, you can actually view it as different than you did before and make it a habit to think the opposite of the bias that you thought. And you can actually improve the way you think about people in the world. And that's not the only case. So my example that I was speaking of earlier was with the growth mindset. And what we learned on early in psychology is there's a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And these people with growth mindsets, the way they view the world is they view their failures as challenges that are going to help them succeed later. And they realize that they might have to work harder at certain things, but this is good because it gives them ethic. People with fixed mindsets believe that you're born as smart as you're ever going to be and you can't really improve that, and there's nothing you can do about it. So the thing about a growth mindset is I didn't believe it at first because I needed scientific evidence. That was my big thing, is I need some kind of biological factor to prove it. And knowing about plasticity, knowing how your neurons can actually fire faster and smoother, and the action potentials can reach faster and synapses can fire faster, tells us that if you practice, it actually does make perfect. And you can have a growth mindset because of this. So having a growth mindset is really just ties into plasticity, because, and that's an everyday life thing, because if you can just change the way you think about things and you really work at it, then your neurons will train your brain to do the same, and it'll really work out well for you.
Well, everything was pretty awesome. I'm pretty happy that you came and talked to us about this, and I just want to thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much, and thank you, audience.
Take care, everyone.